I'm just turning on my recorder. I hope you don't mind. I can't write very fast anymore, and I can't talk and type. I never learned to touch type,
No.
so I'm a bit. I have to record things. I won't be using the actual recording. I'll use transcription if that's as long as that's called for you. And I'm happy to give you a copy of it too, so you know that,
Oh, well,
so
yeah.
you can see what happened. Anyway, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm good. I think I'm going to go to that meetup on the 11th of August in E9. I was just looking at it
Oh, yeah.
for the Computer Arts Society. I thought that was fascinating. Thank you so much for telling me about it. What an amazing
Yeah.
group of people, you know?
Yeah, I think you'll like it. I think you'll find, like-minded spirits, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. But there were some real characters there, weren't there, who you just look at and you're like, wow.
Yes.
You are sort of, and I don't I mean this respectfully, not rudely, but the triumph of the nerds kind of thing. It was, I don't know, it was so interesting, so interesting. I have a number of questions for you.
Okay.
Uh, of
I
course.
hope I can help. I mean, I don't know, but I'll try.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just want to get your. There's no wrong answers. You have an opinion, or you don't have an opinion, or a thought on
Okay.
something, and if you do, that's great, and if not, so be it. We'll move on to another one. So I'm really kind of thinking, like I say, about what distinguishes people making stuff and LLMs making stuff, and what that distinction means, and what affects people in the way they make stuff when they're working with computers. And I have tried to direct these toward your area, I think. I hope.
Okay.
I mean, you might
Yeah.
well hear them and go, oh my God, you totally don't understand what I do you? But anyway, so here is my opening question. All right, now I have 6 altogether.
All right.
Can you think of one specific artist or work where you feel control genuinely passed from the artist's hand to the process itself? Not the general history, just the instance you find yourself coming back to.
Yeah, I think that that's something that the Computer Arts Society was definitely trying to do in the late 60s, early 70s. So if you look at the Eco Game, the goal of that was to try and pass over some of the control of the art making process to the audience via the system. So they made a system, they had an idea, they made a system to work through the idea, and then they relinquished some of that. The participants, the audience, the people who turned up on the day,
Yeah.
and how they reacted through the system. And it was a group thing, so it wasn't like a one person reacting to one person interacting with an artwork. It was a group of people because it was a sort of large participatory artwork. So and you have to remember that at that date it was conceived in about late 69 and constructed in 1970. This was a really radical act.
Yep.
So Ernest Edmonds, who was there at the event that you came to, who's in his middle 80s now, but obviously he was young in those days, and he's a great. He's got a really large brain, so he's great to talk to. But he says that in those days, it was the feeling that the artist was some kind of god, and they would, deign to give you a piece of artwork. And, it was up to the audience the viewers to try and find some meaning in it.
Yeah.
And this was not something that they were interested in because they were interested in systems, digital systems. They saw that this had a unique ability to kind of subvert that it was a very pervasive view that the artist is somehow knows best and we'll tell you what is good, and here it is. And we put it in front of you, and you just have to suck it up, sort of thing. So that was a very pervasive view in the established art world, in this time. And yes, there were happenings, and there were kind of crazy things like at the London Arts Lab in the 60s, but they were really fringe stuff. And even the Computer Art Society was fringe.
Right.
So the mainstream of art that you would see, certainly in Britain, and I would think it's probably the same in the US, was here's a piece of art, and it's up to you to make what you will of it, because I'm the artist and I know best.
Yeah.
So the way that they wanted to change this, and I think because they were interested in computers and systems. I mean, don't forget Ernest Edmonds was a mathematician, and George Malin, who led the EcoGame project, one of the founders of CAS. He was a behavioralist, really, and he was trained in physics. He was a cybernetician. So, art was not the first thing in their minds. But they saw that these systems have the potential to bring out creativity in others. And that's what was really, to nowadays it doesn't seem that but at the time, that was a really radical concept. And it was made possible because of the systems that had been developed, the computing technology that was there. So they did push the boundaries of the technology, but really they were using what they had. They were using what was, so what sort of say, people often say, oh, well, these people were ahead of their time. I'm not sure they were. I think they were very much of their time. They used the stuff that they had available to them, and they saw, how can we exploit this to change the art world for the better and the art experience for the better?
It's interesting you say that, because I am working on a chapter at the moment about agency, and
yes,
have been working around that.
And a lot of the people, when you speak to, they love that cattle. They love that whole earth thing.
I love it. And it's about the same year, isn't it?
It is. Well, it was very influential for a lot of people. They'll talk about it. Paul Brown talks a lot about the Whole Earth catalog. Again, an early CAS member.
Wow. Okay, another question. Do you know of a specific case where compile time or plotter access or mainframe cost actually shaped what an artist chose to do, a decision that was different because redoing it was too expensive or slow or just not available to them?
Yes, well, that I would say that is the standard. I don't think you even need to think of a specific time or a specific incident.
Yeah.
That would have been the standard for everyone in the 60s and 70s, for sure, even right through the late 70s, I was speaking to Joan Truckenbrode, an American pioneer of early digital systems. She started about 1975. And she was telling me how, she would have to obviously punch her cards, keep them all in a very nice, neat stack.
Yep.
Physically go across from the art department. She was at the Art Institute of Chicago, over to the geography department, and wait for them to have a moment to run her cards. And all of this time, she was doing this without any kind of WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, nothing. She couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
So then she would get the printout, which again didn't show her anything. She then went to the plotter. Again, she had to book time on the plotter. And this was the plotter used by the geography department who, were making maps and things. And she could stick her program into that, and eventually she would get her drawing. But she had no idea that it would turn out the way that she had hoped it would, or that she saw in her mind. So people were working in a way completely blind, which again, if you think about this, is an astoundingly radical way to make art, that you can't see what you're doing as you go along.
Yeah.
That is just astonishing. And I think that nowadays we don't really appreciate how totally bizarre and strange that was. In the 60s and 70s, to sort of think, well, I have this idea, I'm going to make a program, this is probably what it will look like, but until you actually see it, you're not sure if it has worked or if it's turned out how you thought it would. And even someone like Ernest Edmonds, who's he's a mathematician by training, he's a logic, trained in logic, mm-hmm. Even he would have been surprised at what's come out. So the process, which involves that whole thing about the cards and the going to the mainframe and the booking time and then the going to somewhere else who had a plotter, that is quite a long process. And so this isn't an art form that was practiced by very many people. It was not kind of mainstream. People didn't sort of automatically think, oh, I know, I'll go along to the geography department, try and convince those people who have this flatbed plotter that makes maps to see if they'll run a drawing for. That's not something that was typical. And there are countless stories, and that my book, A Computer in the Art Room, is full of all the British stories of people who really, worked hard to make this happen. Tony Pritchett, who did the very first computer animation in Britain in 1967, it was shown at Cybernetic Serendipity in 68. This is the first computer animated film in Britain. He worked for 9 months at the Atlas Lab, and he got 3 minutes of footage, and it was, incredibly hard work. So this is not, the kind of person who went in for this is a very specific type of person who is not the norm among artists, but there isn't really a norm of artists because they're all so different. And that's the point about art. It can encompass everything, can't it?
Because
there's probably less than 200 people. If you think about it, there's less than probably 200 people in the entire world who were doing anything with creative computing in the 1960s. It's a very small amount when you think how many artists and there must have been. Yeah. People calling themselves artists,
Yeah, but because in my mind then I started thinking about people wanting to make films and how pre-digital you would have had to go around and beg a bunch of short ends and a camera, and then beg for lab time from someone and time to transfer it and what have you. It was a lot harder. It was a lot harder than now where.
And of course the process, because I think it was difficult and involved many stages, the process became quite an important part of what you were doing. Yeah. So if you speak, and sadly Tony Pritchett is gone now, and so are so many people in my book. But when I was speaking to them, it became clear that the process is very important. The act of doing it, the act of writing an algorithm, a recipe, a list of instructions, working out what it was you were wanting to do. How would you get there? That process becomes very important. And that is something that we see generally in art after the end of the Second World War. As you move in through the century, the processes become quite... the happening, the classic sort of happening is kind of about process, isn't it? You think of Yoko Ono sitting there and inviting the audience to come up and cut her clothing. That isn't really an object. It's the process of people interacting with her in a specific space in a room. There's nothing kind of left afterwards except maybe a photograph that someone took. But the photograph is not the artwork. The process is the artwork. So that's, that's part of Fluxus, isn't it? And Yoko Ono was part of Fluxus.
Yeah. Okay. From the artists you interview, did they talk about resisting or embracing the idea of the machine as doing something active, as opposed to it being a passive tool, like a brush or something?
Well, yes, but let's think about the brush. It's just that, in one of my books, or one of my pieces that I wrote, I can't remember where, I talked about the ferrule, and you can Google this. Apparently when the ferrule was invented, which is around the time of the Impressionists, that bristles could be held together. I know there's an article online where the guy goes on and on about the ferrule as completely revolutionizing the way that people painted. So we say that a brush is kind of passive, but is it, or is it any different from the way a computer works? There's this misnomer that the computer did the work, and that you just press the button, the computer does everything, you don't have to do anything yourself. And of course, people fought against this in the 60s quite a lot. And Joan Truckenbrod, who I've just done this big interview with her, she's been over in London. And I'm going to write it up as what is being written up as a piece for hopefully the Women's Art Journal. But anyway, she again was talking about what was she talking about? I lost my train of thought now. That people were always, even in the 1980s, when she was, she set up the Art and Technology program at the Art Institute of Chicago, which was the first time that had been set up. There had been no program like that previously at that school. And she talks about how people were constantly
Hang on. You've gone. Hello? Hello? You've frozen.
Yasha Reichart said in
Yeah,
1967
hang on.
has
Sorry,
actually come
sorry.
true.
You froze. You froze about 30 seconds ago. You were talking about. Have you frozen again? I think you have. Shall I try and restart this call? Starting to talk about a woman at the
No, I can't
university.
hear you. Sorry, can't hear.
Oh,
Can't
okay.
hear.
Hang on. MacBook Air microphone. Can you hear me?
Oh, I think I'm on. My mute is on. My mic is on, I think.
Hold on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we're using
Sorry, we dropped out. I've
no.
also changed over to my proper account because for some reason it always comes up with the V&A account because I gave a lecture to them, so they set me up with my own personal little thing.
And
I
then
don't think that's a good idea to go routing via the
no.
V&A or something. So that probably didn't help.
Okay. Well, no problem. Where we
That's better. Sorry about that.
no problem. Where we were was you were starting to talk about a woman at the University of Chicago.
Oh yes, Joan Truckenbrode.
Yes.
So even now, in 2026, she was still saying to me about how people thought that the computer does all the work, and this was in her career. This was criticism that she had to kind of overcome. So, but the irony is, of course, that we now have. We now have technology that the computer can do all the work because we can just press a button. We can write we can write a prompt,
Yeah.
and it will tell. And someone who has no artistic training can make something. Now it's not necessarily very good, but nonetheless, it's there. And what's interesting about this historically is Yasha Reichart, and you can this is very well documented. But back in when she did Cybernetic Serendipity in '67, in her book, she talks about. The computer will allow people to, in the future, with no artistic training whatsoever, to make art. And she can't possibly at that point have conceived of what we have now, text to image generators, but nonetheless, she saw that this technology would go that way. And I think, although she doesn't specifically sort of analyze this or talk about why, I think she was a bit worried that it would somehow denigrate artists. It would somehow take away the mystique. And of course, a lot of people producing work in the 60s and 70s were fighting against this because the establishment didn't like it. They didn't understand it. People who didn't know about code in the 70s, I mean, it was a really specialist subject, and you didn't want to admit that you knew nothing. I mean, people in the art world are no good at admitting they know nothing anyway, are they? But it was something that, it's easier just to say that's, push it to one side, say it's rubbish, it's no good, it's not proper art. The computer is doing all the work, where, they had no idea what a computer was. They'd probably never seen one. The vast majority of people had never seen a computer until PCs, personal computers, entered the home. Yeah. And even then, not everybody had one because they were expensive. I mean, my family never had a computer. No, we didn't. So the fact that PCs revolutionized home computing, well, yes, but only if your parents were wealthy, So they don't know what they're talking about because it's easier to say that it's no good than to admit you don't understand something. And when I started down
that's a really interesting point, by the way. I think that's really valid. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, even when I started down this rabbit hole, I didn't know anything either. But I thought, well, I'll just ask. I'll ask artists. And in fact, because the sort of people who tend to do this type of work tend to be the type of people who are, quite reflective on their practice. They're quite intellectual. They're probably quite well educated. They're very happy to talk about the process and to talk about the techniques and to explain stuff, which is way beyond anything that I'd ever heard. So it was very rewarding to speak to people for me because they were told me stuff, and all I did was write it down. I put it in context, and I tried to kind of put some historical, narrative around it. But fundamentally, I just wrote down what artists told me. So there was no secret to what I did, but I did ask questions, which is something that a lot of people in the art world just, because they don't want to admit they don't know anything. Fundamentally, art is just smoke and mirrors, isn't it? So if you don't know it, there's no value to art other than possibly, what the materials cost, which is minimal,
Yeah.
or negligible, or not considered a part of the argument, part of the debate. So there's no way to tell if something has any value, other than if other people say so. And so this is the fundamental problem at the heart of the art world, isn't it? That people have always looked to outside means of giving things value. So has this person been to a proper art school? Has this person done an internship at a famous artist studio? Who's written about this person? What dealer represents them? Blah blah.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people who produced work in the early days, I'm thinking about Ernest Edmonds, and I'm thinking about George Malin, Tony Pritchett. They did not go to art school. So when Yasha Reichardt makes her comment that the computer has allowed people who have never picked up a pencil or put a pen, a brushed pen to canvas before, it allows them to make art. What she's meaning is that people with training like Alan Sutcliffe, George Malin, the architect John Lansdowne, the three founders of the Computer Arts Society, they have not been to art school. They don't have any art training, but they are making creative computing works. Mm-hmm. So then we have to start saying, well, is creative computing its own kind of little category that maybe is separate from art, which is over here? Oh. And it's interesting how, time has evolved. And someone like Ernest Edmonds, who did not go to art school, but always liked art and always considered himself interested in art, he has started to create a narrative. And I've been part of this. I've written about him. That he was an artist in a different guise. He was an artist who went to who went into mathematics, went to the science side of the university. But he's made this narrative that he's kind of constructed a narrative that he always was an artist. And nowadays there's less distinctions. So people aren't quite so rigid as, oh, well, you've not been to art school, therefore you're not going to be considered a proper artist. Mm-hmm. Because, you can get people who don't have training in that department making a lot of money. I'm thinking about Tyler Hobbs, who made a ton of money during the cryptocurrency boom just around the time of the pandemic. And, he is a computer scientist.
And was that NFTs?
But he started making art. He made that Fidenza.
Yeah.
Algorithm, and boom, he's a multimillionaire. But interestingly now, he is starting to paint. So he is putting brush to canvas, and he's made paintings which have been hung in London galleries because he's now trying to make himself a name as a proper artist. So,
oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Why is the particular craft so important? If art is about saying something, leaving some form of something for people to reflect on, why does it matter how it was made?
Well, this is the big and perennial question to which there is no answer. And this is, the art world is a massive machine, organization. It isn't even as well oiled as any of that. It's just a conglomeration of a bunch of stuff thrown in together, the art world. Yeah. Which probably, if you think of other industries, maybe medicine, for example, you wouldn't have anything like this going on, So it's this kind of great conglomeration of a bunch of stuff that just sort of, we could argue it doesn't even get along. I was going to say it gets along together, it rubs along somehow, but it barely does that, to be honest. So, why are some people like Tyler Hobbs getting all the, because he has a huge number of followers, and a London gallery figures maybe some of those people can be translated. And he sold a lot of art that's NFTs.
Yeah.
Maybe some of that could be translated into physical art sales. And so we'll give him a show and we'll give it a shot, because people chase the money in the art world. Because
For
at
sure.
the same time as the art world having a kind of charitable non-profit, there's also this massive profit thing. So, again, other industries I don't think have this. My husband was in the insurance industry for, well, his whole life, and there was nothing. I mean, it was nothing like this. It was a very specific, pin-downable thing.
Yeah.
It didn't have vast areas of people working for free or pro bono stuff. It's very unique, the art world as an industry. I mean, we're in it, and so we can't see it very well, I don't think. But if you look at other industries, they don't act like this. They don't operate like this. So because of that, it means that there's a lot of different voices vying, for airtime. And sometimes he who shouts the loudest gets the most action, so to speak. And a lot of these people, I'm going to go back to these pioneers. I mean, even Yasha Reichardt, and she wrote a lot, and she was a prominent exhibition organizer, and, people know her. But, these people were self-effacing. They were quiet. They were intellectuals. They didn't blow their own horn. They were, they wanted to get on with the work and do something that was interesting and different. And they were about shouting about it. And then maybe you could argue, well, where were they going to shout about it? Because there wasn't social media, there wasn't the internet,
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's easy for certain people to get. I mean, Trevor Pangolin is getting a huge amount of press at the moment, isn't he? He's everywhere. And there's many other artists using AI than him. He's not the kind of the be-all, end-all. But he's got this book out, and he's got millions of followers. And so people have sort of, he just kind of, it's self-perpetuating, isn't it, But I could mention many other people doing interesting work in AI, but they never seem to get much of a look in. So, an artist today needs to be a publicist and a promoter and good at PR and blah, blah, blah. Whereas back in, Tony Pritchett's day, I mean, I said to Tony Pritchett when and this would have been around 2000 and maybe 2003, but possibly 2002. He was a lovely, lovely guy, Tony, really lovely. He was a filmmaker, really. He considered himself to be a filmmaker. And he went to work for the BBC in the early, early days. And he was telling me about this film that he made, The Flexipede, and I said, oh, this is fascinating. And so I was writing notes as quick as I could. And in those days, I didn't even have a recorder. It wasn't until later that I got a little recorder. So I said to him, Tony, where has this been, who's written about this? Have there been any papers done? Because I thought I'll go away afterwards and I'll look this up, because, I can't, as you said, I'm having a hard time writing everything down as fast as I can.
Yeah.
And, there'll be some facts somewhere that I can just double check. And he said to me, well, nobody has ever asked me this before. And I thought, you are kidding me. This is the man who made the very first computer animated film in Britain, and nobody has ever asked for his story from 1967 to 2002. I mean, that's appalling. And why is that? Well, it's because he kind of fell beneath the cracks of the internet when it was going. He never had a social media account. It was, he passed away in about 2012, I guess. We could have kind of just about got there, but he never did. So that history's been lost.
But isn't that the case with any artist? And if they don't shout about it themselves, how's anybody ever going to know about them? I mean, it's not necessarily always the most talented people who rise to the top, is it? I mean, you've got to be able to tell a good story. Certainly, that was the case in advertising. There's no two ways about it.
I totally agree with that. I mean, a lot of kind of lay people, should we say, people outside the art world say, oh, the cream will rise to the top, but it's not the case. I don't believe that at all. And I think people in the art world, we know that that's not the case.
No.
But what you can't do anything much about it. I mean, I write about it. I try and mention it where I can. And, it has now been put on the internet, the film, so you can look it up, put Flexipede into Google, into YouTube, and the film is there. But, he gave me that film on 16 mil tape in a can. Wow. And I took it to the Machine Room, which was a film place in Soho back in the day. I don't know if it's still there. And they transferred it to DVD for me. And that was the first time that anybody had done that.
I remember them. I remember them.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Okay, well, I most definitely will look that up. Most definitely.
Yeah, it's fun. It's like just a cute little film, and it's just it's quirky and it's a little bit eccentric, and like Tony himself, you know.
Yeah,
Um, so the kind of people who did this were not the sort of romantic artist in the garret type of people, who kind of paint away and, you know, like Vincent van Gogh, and they're all kind of wild and crazy and they kind of go mad. You know, they were people who were interested in logic, they were interested in systems, they were very intellectual, they often wrote papers, they often worked for universities, and maybe not necessarily in the art department. And they were interested in trying to use this technology, which had come out of a war. You know, it was
yeah,
invented for very really very bad, nefarious purposes. Can we use that in some kind of positive way?
yeah,
I mean, people like Tony Pritchett, George Mallet, they remember the war. They were there.
yeah,
You know, George was born in 1938.
yeah,
You know, he totally remembers the war. And someone like Roy Ascott, who's now in his early 90s, he was actually sent, I think it was the year after the war. So he was sent, the war had finished, but he was on national service, and he was sent to an air base to learn radar.
yeah,
So, of course, seeing the way that the radar worked across screens was extremely inspiring for him, and he realized that this was going to have a major impact on culture at large. So these people were trying to use technology for good. It was a utopian sort of belief. And it's interesting that now...
right, the same again. The whole Earth catalogue.
Completely. You know, let's do something positive. Let's
Yeah,
change the world for a positive.
yeah,
And I sometimes look at Ernest Edmonds and I think, gosh, Ernest, doesn't it make you sort of feel depressed that there's all this stuff happening? But he's a very positive person, Ernest. So he doesn't feel that way at all. He says time moves on. That's what it was like in the
yeah.
past. It's like this now.
But I think
So
it's
that's a
important
lesson.
that if, as long as there's always people doing that and making those points, then that's the important thing. It's if we
Yeah.
stop doing that, that would be, heartrending.
Well, that's why history is important, I think. You know,
Yeah,
I'm a historian, so that's why I think history is important, because, you know, you can get inspiration from people in the past. You can see how they did things. Now, okay, the things might be different, the methods, the techniques, the materials, but the humanity of it is underlying there, and it still remains. So there
yeah,
are lessons to be learned. And I think the problem is, of course, that nobody understands history. They're not interested in history. And the systems that we have set up in our society, political systems particularly,
oh,
it's not encouraged because, you know, everything's short-termism.
yeah,
So history doesn't matter very much to most people. But if I can find a way to try and bring it somehow into the present, and actually younger people are asking me, you know, how to do talks and to do bright stuff about how the past is informing what we've got going on now, because now we're inundated with all this AI stuff, and people are suddenly, okay, right, what's the history of this?
What
And they don't know it.
on that? What was the actual dream? I mean, maybe you've just said it and you've just articulated it in the last couple of sentences. But what was the actual dream behind cybernetic art? Is that
Well, the
Pascal,
dream was
that
that it would
generation?
change. Yeah, it would change society. You know, they wanted to change society. I mean, George Mellon thought that he had, he was in a privileged position because he had an extremely good education. Back in those days, when he started in the 1950s, and very few people had university education.
Yeah,
He thought that he was in a position that he would give back. We would call it giving back today. He wouldn't
yeah,
have used that term. But, he thought he was in a position to be able to do something useful and positive for humanity. And certainly Ernest Edmonds would say that too. And he would feel that it was the role of someone who had an education and had an insight and the ability to access this stuff, and not just access it, but to use it, I mean, it
hmm,
was incredibly difficult to use. You had to read manuals, or, it was awful. I mean, many people have told me how when they started somewhere, there wasn't even a manual. They were just told, oh, here's the computer, off you go. And well, there were no books, there was no online stuff, there was no tutorials, there was nothing. You had to do it yourself. And if you were a mathematician and if you were a scientist or a technician, well, then you had a little way in because at least you were thinking along those lines. So they felt that it was their duty to try and show, a very early, and I've used this as a title for a paper I wrote, but a very early leaflet that the Computer Art Society produced, which I guess it doesn't have a date, but I'm guessing it's like around 1969. It says, we aim to, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you can look up the exact wording. We aim to make systems fit people instead of making people fit systems. And that is so true today.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, right now, we're all like, oh, Andy Burnham, please, universe, let Andy Burnham kind of do some stuff. But, the underlying message that we all want a system that is people-centered and that it is, keeps humanity at its heart, rather than here's the system and we're going to shove you all into it.
Yeah.
And, you're just going to have to suck it up. Instead of that, let's have some systems that are people-centered and remember the human at the fundamental.
Well, you remember.
Of this. And of course, that's what, the Pope was saying was it last year when he made that special.
Encyclical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was
Magnifica or something.
Yes. Well, Margaret Thatcher said when she was asked about what would happen to society, she said there is no society, didn't she? Or what is society? I can't remember, but it was.
Yes,
it
and
definitely.
I think she was meaning that.
Yes, I think yes, yeah.
I mean, people have misconstrued that as saying she means that that nobody cares about anything. That's not the case, and I believe she cared very, very strongly about Britain. And that's proven through what she did. And it's not to say you have to agree with things that she did, but it's clear that she. But so that's been misconstrued. But that is actually an understanding of somebody who was of that generation of the people that I'm talking about, or maybe she was a little younger, that saw that this top-down approach of here's the stuff, we've made it to control bombs and control weapons, we've made this massive system, and we're just going to give it to you. You're just going to have it, whether you like it or not. So the Computer Art Society, well, what's interesting about them is that they saw that art would be a way to do this. Whereas other people might have thought of education, or they might have thought of, I don't know, whatever other things you could think of. But they thought, no, we can do this through art. So that's what's interesting for the history of art, I think, and really quite different from anything that went before. And there's other groups, too. You can talk about EAT, Experiments in Art and Technology. That was a short-lived thing in New York in the 60s. And that had participation by both a technical person, Billy Kluver, who came from Bell Labs, and an artist, Robert Rauschenberg. So that was, the two sides coming together. So, the main takeaway is that people who were not necessarily trained artists were also involved and also made things that we can consider art. And the equipment was very hard to access. You had to build up relationships with people in these institutions that had this stuff, because not everybody had a computer at home yet. And that the idea was, let's use this technology for good by taking some of the power away from the makers and giving it to the people who are the users, i.e. the participants, the viewers of the art.
Right.
So let's try and delegate some of the power of the artist and see what that would do and how that would empower people. Because we're trying to make a system that fits people, rather than here's a system that is already existing that has caused bombing and warfare. Let's see if we can subvert that somehow. So it's quite radical, but it's actually very quietly radical because it's British, and they didn't shout a lot about it.
I love that. Yeah. Well,
there's a wonderful article written by a guy called Christoph somebody, which dates from the early mid 2000s. And when I was writing a lot at that time, I used to reference this, and he was, the Computer Art Society was just sort of very mainstream, and I was like, actually, no, it's really, really, but they didn't shout about it.
Yeah.
But that's because he's German. He doesn't understand the British sensibility there. It's actually incredibly radical. You know, when Cybernetic Serendipity was running at the ICA in summer of 1968, Matisse exhibition was on at the South Bank.
Yep.
And that was the big show. And I looked up the figures for the people who went to the Matisse. It was, thousands and hundreds of thousands. And the people who went to Cybernetic Serendipity, it's fraction. It's a huge amount. Matisse is what people were into in that summer.
Yeah.
So this was very, very, very shocking to a lot of people and not pleasant. And I can understand that, because if you remember the war, if your parents were in the war, if in 1968, there's a lot of people there who remember the war, one way or the other.
Yep.
And they are not too impressed, maybe, to see this.
No.
And it doesn't look like what art is supposed to look like, because art is supposed to look like a Matisse. And so you kind of are very put off by it.
Yeah,
just like the people who are there are a bit nerdy. You go to Cybernetic Serendipity, a bunch of nerdy types are there.
Well, I think that was similar
introverts.
I think that was similar in music. I think the kind of people who liked Pink Floyd and stuff were probably an element of nerdiness and not.
Yes.
Now
it was a very it's all over different. The radio, and it's like it's almost like mainstream.
Oh, it is. Yes, totally. Well, I mean, given what you've just described, is what's happening with generative AI now a continuation of that cybernetic dream, or would you describe it as an acceleration of it, or is it not in the same, or is it not in the same lineage at all?
That is a very interesting question. And I have to say, because since the pandemic and digital art has been on this massive sort of upward trajectory, everybody's mad keen on digital. A lot of young people got into it and blah, blah. And of course, a lot of the art world has realized that there's money in it, so they got into it. People have been asking me, what is the history? And so I have been constructing a history, me and some other people too. And it appears that, this is the history of artist use and technology. And now we're at this. But really, if you were to ask somebody who would really, a lot of these people would say there is no continuation at all.
Oh, really?
But,
really?
I would say that, yes, there is a continuation, because it's artists using technology. And artists have always used the latest technology. When the ferrule came out, they adopted that.
Yeah.
When paints were put into tubes, and you could put it in your pocket, and out you could go into the outside world, and you could paint en plein air. So, it's always been a question of what's the latest thing that I can adopt? What can make my life easier? What can make my life different? What can provide constraints to my art that might be interesting for me, that I can explore another angle? All this kind of thing that technology enables. Yes, it is a continuation. Artists are using technology. The technology we have today is just a lot more prolific, and it's around us, and everybody knows about it. Mm-hmm. And everybody has an opinion now, whereas previously a lot of people wouldn't have had any kind of an opinion. But now you have to have an opinion, and you can say it because of social media. Generations, I remember as a child, there are people who didn't have opinions, or they kept their opinions to themselves.
Yep.
And that was that, but not now. Oh boy.
No.
So a lot of society has changed alongside the use of the technology, and the technology is obviously is ubiquitous and so on. But there are a lot of people who say that what they were doing in the 60s has no bearing at all on the stuff today. And the reason is, we go back to that systems quote, we were trying to make systems that fit people.
Yeah.
Not people to fit into existing systems.
Right.
And what we have now is an existing system. If you don't subscribe to the Apple thing, then you ain't going to be using the phone.
Yeah.
You've got to do the update. You've got to say, tick the box to the terms. And whether you like it or not, it's handed down to you, and you have just got to take it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can say, well, I'm not going to do it at all. But then you actually cannot live in the modern world. So we have some problems now. In that if you don't subscribe to this stuff, it's very hard to live. You can't probably work. It's very hard to travel. It's very hard to, so whether you like it or not, you are ticking that box. I accept the terms and conditions. Now that does not sit well with people who were doing completely different things in the 60s, because they were not about ticking the box,
Right.
it was completely outside the box. It was, they would have been appalled if I'd sort of managed to go back in time and say to George Mallow, okay, you're going to tick this box about, you don't bother to read it, because whatever it says means nothing to you, because you have to have this device. He would have been appalled by that.
And the one thing I've really noticed with terms and conditions, as opposed to something like the Constitution, is where the Constitution says limits what government can do to you. Terms and conditions always are very much about what they can do to you, as opposed to what you can do with it's like it's their rights rather than your rights, isn't it? Terms and
Completely.
conditions. Which is a very,
Completely,
very
and
different thing.
It's a very different thing from what cybernetics was about.
Yeah.
Completely different thing. Yeah, and it's I think it's kind of quite sad that a lot of that 60s energy, post-war energy that went through the 60s and into the 1970s, where people were really wanting to change the world and let's see what we can do, and not just in art, but in all kinds of directions. Art just underwent an enormous shift in the post-war period. That enthusiasm is kind of petered out. So what happened to it? I don't know. Maybe the people grew up and they got a mortgage, and all the people who had long hair and were flinging themselves about during happenings, they just had to subscribe to the status quo because capitalism. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what happened to a lot of that.
I really do. I mean, I have thought about that to some extent, and I think you're right. I think it is that. I mean, it was the same people who then moved on, Stuart Brand and Wired magazine, and embraced the tech companies, thinking the tech companies were going to give Steve Jobs, were going to give us a better, and then, after Steve Jobs, we get Tim Cook, who Steve Ballmer, who were not about making the world a better place, but were about the bottom line, weren't they?
Yes, because I guess at the end of the day, we are in a capitalist world, really, even China. And so we have to sort of, you either kind of participate in that reluctantly, or you don't have any kind of life, which is sad, really, but that's the way it is. And there are people who drop out, but even those people who drop out are only allowed to drop out because the rest of us are still working in the machine.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a problem, and I think we're realizing now that maybe some of these structures that have been in place since, I don't know, maybe even going back to Victorian times, the Industrial Revolution, maybe even, but certainly since the Second World War, some of these structures are just no longer serving society and humanity the way they ought to.
Which ones?
So what do we do about this?
Which ones in particular do you think?
Well, I would say certainly you're talking about the tech companies. I would totally agree with that. And certain aspects of capitalism. What do we do about this? I don't know. I mean, it's very, very difficult because the structures, the systems that we have that we function within, particularly politically, are very short-termism. And you cannot do things in such short term. Things that are difficult take time. It takes time. So to try and say, I've only got until the midterms, I've only got until the next election, it's kind of like, oh gosh, what we really need is somebody with a long view, which is why actually I'm very, very, on a personal level, I'm a huge in favor of the monarchy. Because I think who else can you imagine who is literally born to it, literally born and raised to love Britain.
Yeah.
There is nobody who loves Britain to that extent. There isn't.
No.
Except the king.
Yeah.
And he has a long-term view because he is just a placeholder. He doesn't see himself as an individual figure. He sees himself as part of history. He's here at this point, and then there'll be somebody else, and then there'll be somebody else. And he's part of a continuum. There is no politician. There's no aspect of capitalism, quite frankly, that is that at all.
No.
So I don't know. I mean, maybe the answer is give the king more power. It's all right if you've got a good king, but if you get a bad one,
I was going to say,
you can cut off his head if you get a bad one, I guess.
Yes, first against the wall. Putting the friction question and the agency question together, Do you think today's artists have lost something by how cheap and fast iteration has become? Or is that just a different set of constraints, not a loss?
Well, yeah, I think it's going to depend on the individual, isn't it? I mean, I'm not an artist, but yeah, I think that would depend on the individual artist because you
Mm-hmm.
do hear people like Sasha Stiles, who is someone I admire, making AI assisted poetry. And, she talks about the constraints and you need to make your own rules and systems, which is similar to what Ernest Edmonds did back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
or anybody else that we've named. Joan Truckenbrode certainly did that. So I guess, yeah, it's just a different way of doing things, and you need to adapt and move with the times. I mean, just imagine if those impressionists said, "Oh, I don't like this paint in a tube. Somebody else mixed this. It's rubbish. Who
Mm-hmm.
was this person who mixed this? I don't know who this person was. It was made in a factory. I want
Yeah.
to get back my studio assistants and grind it up, with a
Yeah.
pestle and mortar." They would never have gone outside and done en plein air, which completely revolutionized modern art, really.
Yeah.
So we have to say that. So yeah, I don't. I mean, maybe there's something to be said for this. In a strange sort of way, it was quite hands-on. You had Joan Truckenbrode, she had the cards, she had the punch machine. She was doing things quite physically. And interestingly now, she started doing textile work, which is by hand on a digital loom.
Oh, wow.
So she still is using her hands quite a lot, Joan Truckenbrode. So maybe the process of going through that was so long and drawn out. It gave you time to think and to kind of reflect, didn't it? And she talks a lot about how she finds the medium computing, the medium of code, as well as the medium of weaving, to be very fluid. And she could change direction, change her mind. But I suppose in order to do that, you need time, don't you?
Yeah.
So, by the time you wander over to the geography department and they're like, "Oh, you can't come in. We're very busy right now. You'll come back next week." You're like, "Oh, okay." You have all weekend and you're thinking about this. And even if you're not actively thinking about it, it's just stating in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
And maybe that informs what comes out ultimately. Whereas nowadays, you can just do like the Fidenza code that Tyler Hobbs made, program, I guess you'd call it. It just reels it off. Boom, 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 boom. Fast fires it. Got millions of them.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have to become a very good editor. You have to say, well, this is good, but that isn't. But what ones do I keep? But what ones do I leave? And Harold Cohen talked to me about that. He didn't use the term editor or curator. You see the term curating used quite a lot in this today, in this instance, don't you? But Harold Cohen did say to me, because of course he would run his program overnight. He would come down in the morning and he would see what it had done, what Aaron had done. And he would look at them and he'd say, "Oh, these ones are terrible." He'd just discard them. But, the reason he did that, and he would maybe only keep one or two, but the way that he was able to do that was because he was a trained artist. He had a phenomenal eye. He went to art school when he was 18.
Right.
He spent decades as a painter before he then moved into computing, which was simply a different type of material for him. He was still doing the same thing. He considered himself to be doing the same thing, but he just was using different materials. He started off in paint, and then he carried on in code, taught himself to write code. So that idea of curation and editing, that's been around for quite a while with Harold, for certain. He was doing that in the 80s and 90s, way before Tyler Hobbs' Fidenza. But I think what it has caused, this ubiquitous, that we've got lots of imagery now, we're inundated with imagery. I mean, everywhere we go, there's imagery. I think that's made the general public has become very skeptical about it all, haven't they? And there's a kind of a downturn at the moment against AI. Oh, this is rubbish and slop. People writing slop in the comments a lot, aren't they?
I see there's a huge amount of that. My only thing about that is I feel there was plenty of slop before AI. It's just ever since the advent of digital, It's become easier to make every single thing you can possibly think of. and
And it's been easier to see as well.
yes,
It's more visible to us.
yeah,
I mean, you're quite right. There was plenty of slot before, but we never saw it
yeah,
because there were only two shows in London. There was the Matisse and there was Saturday Night Saturday, so we went to the Matisse.
yeah, yeah,
Now there's millions of shows.
yeah,
I mean, imagine going back. I was in a church not so long ago, a very old church, and they were famous for their stained glass there, which had survived the Reformation, which is quite something.
yeah, huge.
And I thought, imagine going back to that time and the light, because we've had really good summer with a lot of light, haven't we?
Yeah,
And of course, they were just popping off the walls. Here's the dark brick, and then this incredibly bright, backlit stained glass, like a screen, because our screens are backlit.
yeah,
And I just thought, imagine, back in the day when you couldn't probably, I would have been born a serf. I wouldn't have been able to read or write.
yeah,
Matt, you would never see visually. You would never see things other than maybe a sunset or, the moon or something. So, apart from natural phenomena, you would go in there and you would see that, and it would just blow you over.
and
It would have been so shocking and surprising and astounding and wonderful.
well, but you go there. And I always just imagine if you're a serf and you come across a large church or cathedral anyway. I mean, you'd be astonished that anything could be built like that. And you go in, they weren't painted white. Then they had stories from the Bible painted on the walls, and with
Statues,
Cromwell.
carvings.
Yes, I mean, it must have been an absolutely fear-engendering experience, awe,
Yes.
wonder. I mean, just astonishing, right?
Everything completely, and we are sort of losing that, and it's kind of concerning because that is a fundamental part, I think, of what it is to be human. So if we lose that, I mean, there's a girl called Gali Inev who's working on a book for Springer about what is left
Oh, that's
in
interesting.
humanity in the time of AI.
Yep,
And she's working on it now, and hopefully I'm going to write a chapter for it.
yep,
And my chapter is going to be about the art. And I'm going to have to try and get across somehow, that what we are losing is this sort of sense of awe. And I think it's too bad, really, because it's quite hard nowadays to get that. I mean, people are looking at the thing, they're saying, is this AI, this social media video?
yep,
Because a lot of people can't recognize the AI
Yep.
because they haven't been trained well enough on visual, literacy.
and it's getting better and better.
And it's getting better and better, of course, and it's been designed to fool you in
Yeah.
lots of subtle ways.
Yeah,
But will that completely go then? Any kind of visual literacy? Because we'll just think, oh, well, it is just, and we won't have any sort of sense of being awestruck by a glorious. I mean, people are turning more to nature now, aren't they? In fact, the younger
Yeah.
people, I think the whole nature thing has become much more important for them. So it's interesting they're turning away from that. And they're interested in experiences instead of stuff, instead
Well,
of things.
I think that comes back perhaps you do need to go to an actual place that does curate stuff and makes an effort to do it rather than it's easy to distract your brain, isn't it, just scrolling through Instagram or whatever, but
Absolutely.
that's not the same as standing in front of a fantastic piece of art and really kind of wondering how did they think of that.
Yes. Well, maybe the role then here is organizations and institutions and museums have got to step it up because that is what's going to really be important in the future.
Yeah.
But then, then we've got a whole lot of associated questions with that to do with funding. And, it's I saw that Peckham Digital has lost their funding this year. And they are a really great little organization, little digital festival takes place in Peckham every year.
Yeah.
And I've done some things with them over the years. And the Arts Council has previously given them a grant. I'm not going to do it this year.
Why not?
And you just think, why not? Because we need a counterpoint to what's going on with people who understand the digital. I mean, the thing about digital artists is they understand imagery and digital. We know about the systems. We know about art. We know what it can do. We know how to manipulate. We know about it. We're experts in it. So why not give us a little bit of, help us kind of show the way for some people. There's some power here that we have. We need to stand up and use it more.
I
And
thought
we are, places like Peckham Digital are.
But I thought the funding for things like that came from the lottery and what have you. I can't imagine people are spending less on the lottery.
No, I know. I think it's very sad they just decided we're not going to do it to you this, and who knows why? Is it one person sitting in a room who just, I'm not going to tick that box, or is it a sort of a more? Is it indicative of a more widespread, ethos? I have no idea, but it seems very counterproductive and sad for what is the sake of a small amount of money.
I wonder if it is because it's connected to electronic arts and there's such a backlash.
There is at the moment.
I
You're
think
certainly
it's.
right.
I find it really, really
Yeah.
sad and worrying at UCA. Even
Yeah.
I was walking around
Really.
and there was a leaflet left on a table. One of many, many been dropped all over
Mm.
the place by the students asking that AI be banned entirely from UCA. And
Wow.
I think that's
Yeah.
extraordinarily short-sighted. One,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of fun you could have with it.
Yeah.
But secondly, when you go out into the world, you better understand how to use it
I'll say.
nowadays, or you're going to be
Yeah.
in a world of.
And you need to discuss this. The
Yes,
issues around it need to be discussed. And the
absolutely,
university is the place where you do that. But
absolutely.
I went to University of the Arts. What are they in Farnham? Is that
Yes,
is it
yeah,
called
that's
University of the
yeah,
Arts?
that's the same one, but a different
Yes.
campus.
Same,
Yep,
same with you.
that's where I
Yes.
saw. That's where I
Okay.
met you.
Yes, that's right. Of course.
Oh,
And
Epsom,
yes, and of
Epsom,
course
I
they
met you.
were they were at that well, it was a conference of teachers, wasn't
Yeah,
it? And that is what somebody said there about what was who now I need to look up on the because I ought to put this down in my chapter on what is left
yeah,
because it's again like you're saying, if this is what we're doing to our young people, then this is not on.
no,
But apparently somebody said the students were saying, could we the students were frightened. The person who did they did a survey. One of the papers was
yeah.
about someone who did a survey and found that X numbers of students were scared of AI. And I thought that is really terrible.
Yes,
That's what we're giving our young people.
yes. What does that mean? Even I mean, that's so.
I mean, that's awful.
That's
That's
just.
just awful.
That's
We have
just.
failed our young people. That's what we've done to them. I think that's terrible.
I do. I absolutely do, and I think. I think the university has a duty to be educating people
Yes.
to how to
Yes.
use AI to help you think as opposed to how to
Yes.
use AI
Yes.
replacing your thinking, and it's such a big.
And it may turn out that you decide you don't want it, and you're having none of it, and
And
that's
that's fine.
absolutely fine, and
That's
that's your
fine.
prerogative. But you've
Yeah.
got to be there as part of a debate.
Yes.
So I think it's I don't know. It's kind of well, I think we're on a cusp. We're like those people in the Industrial Revolution. Because when I was writing about Joan Truckenbrood, I had to talk about. So I had to look up a few things about the Jacquard loom.
Yes.
And of course, that was Jacquard, who was literally assaulted in the streets of Paris, and stuff was thrown at him. Rotten fruit was thrown at him
Yeah.
because he invented a loom that might take away some people's jobs.
Yeah.
So, I think we're at the point, we're on a cusp right now. Like that. We're like walking down the street and fruit is being thrown around. And we're sort of like, oh my God, we don't know what's what because we're in it. We're immersed in it. So, I think we need a bit of time. It's very interesting. It's very exciting to live in this time, but it's also very scary.
We are, but I feel I'm excited by it, but I bother to engage with it a lot and try and learn as much as I can about it, and I don't think that Sam Altman and Elon Musk and David Sachs are perhaps the people we want trying to sell it to the rest of the world, because they do a terrible job of it.
I know. I tend to agree with you, and part of the problem. Well, I'll say this last to finish. One of the
Yes.
things that's completely different from the 1960s and 70s is that the technology was in universities,
Yeah.
and now it is not.
No.
And in fact, that would be a super thing for my chapter, because I could then segue into your point about seeing the leaflet, please ban it, about
Yeah.
the student survey that said we're scared,
Yeah.
because it was made for warfare purposes, but in the U.S. they put people in universities, and the government funded the university
Yep.
to make the machine.
Yep.
And of course, now the machinery is out of the university. In fact, quite the contrary. They don't even have the latest stuff.
No.
Joan Truckenbrood told me that only recently, in the 2000s, the Art Institute of Chicago, School of the Art Institute of Chicago, has finally got a digital loom.
Oh my goodness! Wow. Yeah.
You know, and she put it. She was the head of faculty there for many years. Well, she taught there for 25 years, and she put it in her budget every year. We want to get a digital loom. We want to get, and it was never granted.
Wow. But these tech companies should be doing more to get stuff out to the universities, I think. I really do.
Well, yes, but you know, I went into Goldsmiths the other day, and here's a big banner right by the front door with a QR code. Sign up to the Adobe. All students get free Adobe.
Yep.
But is that really sort of what we want? That's not the same as having.
No.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the world in which we live. So we have to work with what we live with, and so we're going to have to. Yeah, we're going to have to adapt and work with what we have. And don't forget that they did that precisely that they worked with what they had.
Yes.
George Mellon worked with what he had.
Well, I mean, eventually we'll get through this stage and come out the other side differently. But as you say, at the moment, it's a moment of great uncertainty, isn't it? And you know,
It certainly is.
Well, that was super helpful. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, maybe it gives you a little bit of a historical thing that you could kind of
it does.
weasel some way into your
Yeah,
thing,
it
because
does, big time.
I'm so keen on history, and I think that
No.
you know it has such a lot.
No,
You know, history is so rich.